There are places in Britain where the past rests easily, settling into the soil and fading into ordinary life. And then there are places where the past still stirs beneath the surface, and the air carries echoes that never quite fade. Places like the Airfields of Kent. In the summer of 1940, this peaceful corner of countryside became one of the most violent battlegrounds in British history. A sky-born front line where life and death were decided in seconds. This is where the Battle of Britain was fought. And though the skies above Kent have long since fallen silent, the land has not forgotten. Across the county, from the windswept runway of Manston to the sloping fields of Hawkinge, from scattered crash sites to hidden bunkers, the stories of those who fought here still move. Some remain in the museums and memorials dedicated to them. Others linger in stranger ways, footsteps where no one walks, voices in empty rooms, and figures glimpsed in the shadows of old hangars. This is Haunted Skies 3. This time we're not travelling the country, we are stepping into a single region, one that stood between Britain and defeat, one shaped by courage, sacrifice, and terror. Join me as I visit Manston, Hawkinge and Westmoreland on a journey into Hellfire Corner. By the early 1940s, the RAF was the fragile spine of Britain's survival. France had fallen, and an invasion seemed inevitable if the Luftwaffe could incapacitate the RAF. What followed became known as the Battle of Britain, and at the centre of that struggle was Kent. Already the base for Operation Dynamo, the rescue of troops from Dunkirk, no other region sat so close to danger. From the cliffs of Dover, you can see France standing 21 miles across the channel. For aircraft, that distance is nothing, and it could take as little as 6 minutes for Luftwaffe fighters to be in a position to attack. Airfields like Biggin Hill, Westmoreland, Detling, Manston and Hawkinge formed a defensive web designed to intercept German aircraft almost the moment they crossed the water. Because of this, Kent witnessed dogfights played out at terrifyingly low altitudes. As people watched, planes took off, clashed, and fell burning from the sky as battles were fought overhead. Even now, the Earth gives up reminders of that summer, with twisted fragments of metal emerging on beaches and from gardens. By late August 1940, the airfields themselves were under relentless attack. It was a time of extraordinary courage, tenacity and loss. Each station has its own scars, its own memories, and perhaps something more. This is RAF Manston. Having been a site for the Royal Flying Corps in World War I, it was established as an RAF base at the start of the Second World War. In 1943, pilots from 617 Squadron used Manston in the testing of Barnes-Wallis's bouncing bomb, a prototype of which is on display at the RAF Manston History Museum. Together with Carnaby and Woodbridge, Manston served as an emergency landing strip for bomber crews. Its vast runway, longer and wider than almost any in Britain, saved countless lives. But not all. If your engines were failing, if fire was creeping through the fuselage and the coast of England was still a distant line on the horizon, you aimed for Manston. The airfield absorbed every desperate arrival, every impact, every fire, and over time it gathered memories. The museum, built in the old motor transport garage, is now the keeper of those memories, and some say the airfield still has stories of its own. A figure in flying gear is sometimes seen outside, speaking in a language volunteers don't recognise. Some believe he may be Jean de Solis, a flight lieutenant based with 609 Squadron. Famous for his attack on the Gestapo headquarters in Brussels, de Solis died attempting to land at Manston on the 16th of August, 1943. In the museum's 1940s experience, which includes a carefully reconstructed wartime home, visitors and volunteers often hear the sound of children laughing and playing. During busy days, this can be dismissed, but at night, when the museum is locked and still, the sound becomes much harder to explain. And as no children were ever stationed at Manston, their presence is a mystery unless the spirits are tied not to the airfield, but to some of the items on display. Almost every object here is a donation, a fragment of family history salvaged from bygone homes, like this typewriter. Forming part of an office display, it is set up to look as though the typist has only stepped away for a moment, but many who work at the museum have heard it clattering late in the day, the clear noise of keys striking with slow deliberation. There aren't any footsteps, and no figure has been seen. There's just the sound of words being typed by hands that are no longer here. Elsewhere, a heavy door repeatedly swings shut after the wedge holding it open is kicked free by an invisible force. Loud dragging noises echo across empty floors as though something weighty is being pulled through the building. A cafe table once moved positions so often that unsettled staff eventually relocated it. And in the armoury, orbs hover above displays of weapons and munitions before drifting away like curious observers. According to Bruce Barrymore Halpenny in his book Ghost Stations, one of the most baffling encounters at Manston took place shortly after D-Day. A damaged Lancaster bomber struggled onto the runway, skidding before becoming tangled in netting, its starboard wing jutting into the air. Miraculously, the crew escaped unharmed and their pilot left the engines running as they scrambled clear. The crash crew chief, Sergeant Petrie, boarded the bomber to make it safe. Inside, he found a civilian in a brown pinstripe suit who urgently warned him to get out before the plane caught fire. The stranger even reached past him to shut off an engine. But no civilians were allowed on the airfield. None had been on the bomber, and no one else had entered the aircraft. Whoever had helped Petrie was simply gone. Halpenny wondered if the unknown man had been a guardian angel. Given that this figure hasn't been reported since, he might be right. I visited the RAF Manston History Museum and spoke with people who work there and who clearly love the place. I stood in the 1940s experience, surrounded by the past. I touched fragments of a wrecked flying fortress, and I looked with sadness at the photographs of men and women who would not survive the war. If there are spirits here, then it's because this is where they belong. They're part of the fabric of the museum. And those who have felt a presence or heard a mysterious noise say there's nothing to be afraid of. Because in a place that saw so much pain, so much courage, and so many final moments, some part of the past is always going to remain close. Manston stood as a lifeline to planes limping home, but to the south, another airfield carried a very different burden. RAF Hawkinge was a fighter base and the closest RAF station to occupied France. The road toward Hawkinge takes you through quiet villages and past peaceful, rolling fields. The Cat and Custard Pot pub, once frequented by airmen, is closed and shuttered, and along the aptly named Aerodrome Road lies the cemetery with its 155 war graves. These are a stark reminder that the Battle of Britain was fought not in the abstract, but by young men whose final journey ended here. On the opposite side of the road, a memorial honours them, its inscription speaking of history's flickering lamp stumbling to revive the echoes of former days. But here, on this hillside above Folkestone, the echoes have never really faded. Today, housing covers much of the old airfield. The street names, like Gibson Close, Lancaster Drive and Churchill Walk, hint at what once stood here. The Kent Battle of Britain Museum occupies several surviving buildings and holds the world's largest collection of Battle of Britain artefacts. It was here that, on the 12th of August 1940, in a 10-minute assault, 2 hangars were wrecked, 2 houses destroyed, 28 craters torn into the ground, and 7 men killed. It was the first of countless raids to come. By the end of that summer, little more than the frames of almost every hangar remained, the buildings pummeled again and again. Despite its battered surfaces and exhausted defences, Hawkinge remained active until late 1944. In the years that followed, the site changed purpose and, in 1947, part of the remaining complex became a WAF depot. The war was over, the threat had passed, and Hawkinge should have been a quiet posting. But not everything on the airfield seemed willing to settle. One night, a WAF walking across the grounds reported seeing a man ahead of her, a pilot in full flying kit, helmet and all. He had a faint glow around him, a pale shimmer that didn't belong to moonlight or lamps. She watched him for several seconds, unsure whether to call out, and then, without warning, he dissolved into the darkness. Over the years, others described seeing a lone figure on the airfield. A pilot, moving with a strange, sideways gait as though favouring an injured leg. Witnesses spoke of a grey, hazy outline, a man who walked with purpose, but never reached any destination. Some believed he was one of the many fighter pilots who had taken off from Hawkinge and never returned, a solitary airman, drifting across the ghost of a runway, walking the line between duty and eternity. Years later, long after the airfield had become a residential estate, one warm summer night brought another echo of the past. A man visiting friends heard the unmistakable drone of a piston-engine aircraft. It passed overhead along the line of a runway erased decades earlier, and then vanished. No aircraft had been logged, no lights were seen, and yet he would swear he had heard it, this ghostly reminder from the past. And strange as it seems, Hawkinge isn't the only airfield where echoes like this are still heard. Further inland lies the neat, modern community of Kings Hill. But beneath the houses and neat paving lies the old RAF Rest Malling, another place shaped by fire, fear and heroism. And there, too, people speak of engines in the night. West Malling was a major night fighter base, home to squadrons of Mosquitos, and every so often, usually on a moonlit night, residents hear the deep, unmistakable growl of a Mosquito's twin engines passing low overhead. While only the Art Deco control tower survives to hint at what once stood here, many people insist the airfield never really closed at all. Locals talk of a ghostly airman who wanders the old runways and verges, a solitary figure in wartime kit who appears and disappears without a sound. Others tell of an unseen presence with a temper. In the late 1970s, George Kimber, head of security at the site, faced a series of impossible events. One of the old H-blocks had always felt unsettling. People walking alone inside it felt someone pacing beside them, matching their steps. The intruder alarms would regularly go off around 2 or 3 in the morning with no one inside, and the systems were always checked and confirmed fault-free. To prove their patrols, the guards had to drive out to a checkpoint on an isolated landing light pole, which stood with open ground on all sides and no cover. Yet on 2 occasions, as the van approached across the empty airfield, a house brick slammed into the vehicle. Kimber reportedly said, "There was no way in the world a human could have done it." But West Malling has quieter hauntings too. Residents speak of airmen strolling through gardens or appearing in bedrooms as though still on duty. In the early 1980s, a film director shooting We'll Meet Again complained about 2 extras lingering by a jeep, only for the crew to discover no such actors existed. I visited Kings Hill not long ago and ended my walk in the cafe inside the old control tower. It's a peaceful place now with the usual rhythm of an ordinary coffee shop. But through the tall windows, I could still trace the ghost of the airfield. And drinking coffee in that room, it struck me how strange it is that places can move on while still holding everything they once were. The light falls differently now, the sounds have changed, but the memory of the airfield feels woven into the quiet. West Malling doesn't feel haunted in the traditional sense. It feels remembered, as though the past is still present in ways that are impossible to prove. Kent is a county where the past does not sleep. It lingers in the long shadows of old hangars and in the quiet spaces where runways once carved their lines across fields. The airfields have grown still, their purpose changed, their outlines softened by time, and life moves on over ground once shaken by war. Yet even now, something remains. Not in fear, but in memory. People speak of footsteps in empty corridors, of figures glimpsed along old perimeters, of engines rumbling overhead where no aircraft fly. These ghosts, if that's what they are, do not feel like intruders. They feel like part of the landscape, shaped by the courage, terror and sacrifice that once defined this place. In Hellfire Corner, the line between history and haunting is thin, no more substantial than the horizon on a clear evening. Perhaps that's why the past feels so close here. It's the ground where youth was spent too quickly, where lives ended too soon, and where bravery became woven into the soil itself. The spirits that linger walk not out of restlessness, but because we still remember them, because their stories still matter. And sometimes, on quiet evenings, it almost feels as though the county remembers too. As if the land itself is listening for the sound of homecoming engines, carrying its airmen back at last. Thank you for joining me on this journey through Hellfire Corner. If you enjoyed this episode and want to help the series continue, please consider liking or hyping the video and subscribing to the channel. Until next time, thank you for watching and take care.